Hey mate, 40 here. So a story out of Atlanta. A white 21-year-old Christian dude went and killed 6 Asian women, 2 others. He was particularly targeting massage parlors. He apparently wanted to get rid of the source of temptation in his life. So police investigate suspects' motive in Atlanta area killings. White gunman charged Wednesday with killing 8 people, most of them women of Asian descent, at 3 Atlanta area massage parlors in an attack that sent terror through the Asian American community. Robert Aaron Long, 21, told police the attack was not racially motivated. He claimed to have a sex addiction, and he lashed out at the sources of temptation. So 6 of the victims were identified as Asian, 7 of the victims were women. One Vietnamese American politician says that these shootings appear to be at the intersection of gender-based violence, misogyny, and xenophobia. I don't think it was any of that. The guy had some sexual temptation, some sexual problems that he did not know how to handle, and so he lashed out. So any woman who's familiar with a guy who's worshiping her until she rejects him, and then he turns vicious. That seems to be the story here. Apparently, he was planning to go to Florida. Robert Aaron Long. He did have his Christian testimony online, but that's been scrubbed by his church. His father's a pastor. He apparently has what he considers a sex addiction. He sees these massage parlors as something that allows him to go to these places. It's a temptation for him that he wanted to eliminate. When asked whether somebody could have sexual encounters at these businesses, the sheriff's captain said she did not want to get into victim blaming and victim shaming. Too early to tell if the attack was racially motivated, but the indicators right now is that it might not be racially motivated. So the attack began at Young's Asian Massage Parlor. Then an hour later, he went to Gold Spa. 3 women were found dead. Gold Spa's in a strip of tattoo parlors and strip clubs, one of the last ungentrified hoardouts in the upscale area of Atlanta. Officers then learned of a call reporting gunfire across the street at Aromatherapy Spa. Another woman shot dead. So not sure if they did more than aromatherapy at the Aromatherapy Spa. Now, I know a little bit about Eroticized RAGE from my own experiences. I remember once I read to my therapist an essay about what I wanted out of my love life. And when I finished, my therapist said, "Have you ever heard of the term eroticized rage?" I said, "No, but it rings true." I had a girlfriend, Holly Randall, who said to me, "Take out all your rage at women on me in bed." And my therapist says that eroticized rage relates to sexual intercourse, but also about how you treat women in general, how you get them into bed, how you manipulate. Doesn't have to be a reaction to the mother figure, but it most often is. Men who are sexually compulsive, men who use women and throw them away, often felt squashed by their mothers. They felt powerless, and so they tried to retake their power. So this young man may have indeed felt utterly powerless before his sexual drive and tried to retake power. I spoke about this back in March of 2013, so 8 years ago, with Yoshi Obayashi and my friend Joey Kurtzman.
Listen to DVD ASA, and one of the things that the feedback that we've always gotten on that is that, "I love you guys, you're so honest, you just say what's going on, and it makes me feel less lonely, and we like to listen to it." I always appreciate that. I think we are very, very honest compared to most people. We're Bush League compared to Luke. Luke has a show that he's doing in April. If you go to that show...
Which is the name of it is what?
The name of it is Eroticized RAGE. And if you go to that show, you will see a level of honesty that you haven't heard on DVD essay. Not because we are not willing to be that honest, but because we're genuinely not capable of it. Luke has it's astonishing. If that's what you find feeling about those podcasts, I highly recommend you go to Eroticized RAGE. I was fucking blown away by it. Really, it was the single most powerful night of theater I've ever experienced in my life, and I spent 6 years in New York going to theater, so that says a lot.
And I apologize, Luke. I wanted to go, but it was Super Bowl Sunday. And, I'm sorry. My mother could be dying from a heart attack. I'm sorry. Super Bowl number 1, number 2, and always top 3. So, but Look, thank you very much for coming here. I want to just start from the beginning, like your childhood in Australia and about your father. It's just everything's fascinating. So I'm sorry, we probably have a couple of hours, but I want to hear all of it, and we'll end the tail end of it just getting detail about your show. So welcome to the show, Luke.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Pressure's on you now.
Let's just talk about Luke the whole time.
Yeah. What kind of kid were you growing up in Australia? What was it like growing up in Australia?
I'd say depressed, angry kid. I reminded many people of a Holocaust survivor. My eyes were just like sunken into my skull because my mother slowly withered away and died of cancer before I was 4. And so my father couldn't really look after me and do his work at the same time, so I got bombed out to a lot of different people.
Okay, I remember when my therapist diagnosed me with eroticized rage, I immediately ran home. It was Friday afternoon before the Sabbath. I wanted to Google what the heck is eroticized rage. So I Googled it. This is what I found. So in 1975, Robert Stoller, who was a UCLA psychiatrist who was killed by a drunk driver in something like 1990, he described perversion as the erotic form of hatred. It is sexual behavior that breaks the rules, and that social disapproval, judgment, and shame are key to arousal taking place. So eroticized rage usually describes anger that is underneath sexual behavior that is socially unacceptable. So this taps into a sexual fantasy life that tends to be very opportunistic and predatory. Now, the person with eroticized rage may never act on these fantasies due to social inhibitions or the lack of opportunity, but in all likelihood, his eroticized rage will manifest in more acceptable behaviors. And treatment usually involves sifting through the collage of potential sources of eroticized rage. These are things like grievance, the desire for revenge, entitlement, rule breaking, are rooted in some sense of betrayal, hypocrisy, and unfairness. Sexual, physical, and emotional abuse often set the stage. Partners who are demanding, difficult, and unresponsive are often part of the betrayal scenario. Also consider bosses, communities, and social injustices as part of the entitlement. So some men rape women for reparations, for political reasons. Then another key component is insufficiency of the self, a belief that you're simply not adequate. This causes despair. You'll never be able to meet your own needs. And then this often goes along with personality issues such as depression, dissociation, the compartmentalization of the self, character disorders, or the self-absorbed personality traits of narcissism. And then eroticized rage also depends upon vulnerability. So arousal which hinges on the vulnerability of the self or of others, usually vital to eroticized rage. Some of the most damaging consequences of human sexual behavior reside in the dark corners of vulnerability. So often sexual arousal is increased by the possibility of exposure or shame. Rage, anger, long been recognized often as a key component in sexual violence. So it's essentially anger that has been sexualized. Anger and rage have many faces in human sexual behavior that are obscured by their erotic content. So social disapproval, judgment, shame tend to aid rather than retard the pervert's arousal. Now, that's why some of us may love traditional religion, because then more things are sinful and hence more things are exciting. So a religion such as Orthodox Judaism, with its thousands of rules, is particularly exciting. So Dr. Patrick Carnes is an expert in the field. Says, first, I ask my patients to make explicit their sexual arousal template, what experiences, scenarios, eroticized rage, objects, preferences, beliefs, feelings go into arousal for the patient. Is there an ideal fantasy which can then be made explicit? So my sexual fantasies were all about me wielding power over women, and they were a reaction to me feeling repeatedly victimized by women, particularly in childhood. Felt like they had all the power. Now I want to take it back. So I've never acted on my perverse fantasies except for in role-playing games with girlfriends. Social constraints, the law, the LAPD, communal standards, society standards, they've generally restricted my behavior. Now, I had lots of nasty fantasies, but just because you have nasty fantasies doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to act them out. I don't think someone's a bad person because they have their bad thoughts. So you can act like a mensch, but then your fantasies can run free. Now, those who feel particularly vulnerable to women, say a woman comes along and just her presence seems to make all your pain disappear, and you suddenly feel like a real man because she smiles at you and because she talks at you. That's tremendous power that you are ascribing to this woman, and you may resent that they have so much power over you. So until recently, I've always struggled financially. Therefore, I've rarely felt powerful in my relationships, except with the most pathetic of loving chicks who I could not respect because their own lives were so screwed up, even more than my own. So my eroticized rage fantasies would momentarily restore my sense of self, and then afterwards I would feel increasingly degraded. So when a girl would reject me, or when a girl would cheat on me, or when life would reject me or treat me bad, I would try to deal with my pain by losing myself in fantasy. Then I could tell myself that, hey, I don't hurt so much, things aren't so bad, and I can just deaden my feelings of loss. And when I was a child, like many children, I often felt powerless. I had many caretakers early on who were highly controlling. During my teens, I basically stopped speaking to my stepmother as I formed my own identity. But my identity continued to be profoundly affected by my feeling powerless as a child. This would fuel my anger at women as an adult, and my desire to be predatory and powerful with the ladies just to even the score, that somehow sex with attractive women would just complete me, that this hot chick, she was a missing piece in my puzzle. If only I could have her, use her, conquer her, then I'd feel powerful. I don't think someone who has felt in control of his life would have been nearly as obsessed as I was with having the power. It's strange. I have not tended to fantasize a lot about having loving sex within a committed relationship.
There was a huge gap between your siblings, weren't there?
Yeah, my sister's like 11 years older, and my brother's almost 9 years older than me.
I see.
So my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer on my first birthday.
Yeah.
And then so after that, I kept getting shopped around to different people.
Yeah.
And I'd stayed someplace for a few weeks, another place for a few months. And it was a bit of a horror show. So I never learned that basic human connection that you get when you can connect to your mother. Like when you can just like look at your mother and your mother looks at you, and you can start to learn to connect. So I was disconnected and just angry. And I remember I was about 4 years old. My father heard me screaming, and he came out and he saw me flinging manure at these kids and screaming, "I hate you, I hate you."
Yeah.
And just like the level of rage just really disturbed my father because he thought it meant I was so disconnected from Jesus.
Right. Do you remember about your mom?
I only have one memory of my mother, and that is serving me scrambled eggs.
I see.
So just like gay men rarely have good relationships with their fathers, so they didn't really get that normal amount of fathering, so they tend to eroticize male attention, and that's why they go the homosexual route. So to sexual perverts, they rarely have had good relationships with their mother. This is from Good Morning America.
Tragic news, the deadly shootings in Atlanta, killing at least 8 people. A suspect is in custody this morning, and police across the country are on alert this morning as well, fearing the attacks may have targeted the Asian community. Steve Osensami is in Atlanta with more as the FBI now gets involved. Good morning, Steve.
That's right, Michael. The FBI is working with local law enforcement here investigating these shootings. And while it's not clear what led to these killings, it is impossible to ignore that these killings happened at Asian businesses like this one directly behind me in Atlanta, and that most of the victims were Asian women. Georgia authorities are investigating 3 crime scenes across 2 counties in what looks like a series of deadly shootings at Asian massage parlors.
My understanding, they shot up a spot there. They've shot up 2 spots here in Zone 2.
After a police chase that took them south of Atlanta, authorities arrested this man, 21-year-old Robert Aaron Long. Police say he was seen on surveillance video outside the scene of the first shooting around 5 p.m. Tuesday at Young Asian Massage Parlor in a North Atlanta suburb. Moments after these pictures, police say he started gunning people down.
We do not have a witness that actually is alive right now that can tell us who shot him.
People were running for their lives. Police say that 2 Asian women, a white woman and a white man, were killed. They say a man who is Latino survived his wounds. His niece says he wasn't even at the business and was caught in the gunfire.
He was coming out of the store beside the massage parlor and the other store beside it, and he was outside.
Investigators say it is extremely likely that Long is the same gunman seen at 2 other shootings more than 30 miles away in northeast Atlanta, and they point to a black SUV seen on surveillance video near the crime scenes. Just 45 minutes after the shooting in the suburbs, police were called to this spa in Atlanta where 3 women were dead inside. While police were there, the call came in from yet another spa across the street where another woman was shot and killed. Police tell us they don't know if race is the reason for these killings, but to be safe, they're putting similar Asian businesses on alert and stepping up patrols.
Okay, there's no evidence to believe that race is behind these killings. It's pretty obvious that he wanted to remove these sources of sexual temptation.
I mean, I don't know how you would go in there or what kind of motive would drive you to do such a thing.
President Biden has been briefed on this. There have been an increasing number of attacks against Asian Americans in this country. Most people believe tied to this racist trope that Asians are somehow responsible for the coronavirus because of where...
Has nothing to do with that, mate. Come on, give me a break.
All right, we want to take a look at the suspect now who authorities arrested in connection with the deadly shootings. He's 21-year-old Robert Aaron Long of Woodstock. An extensive manhunt coming to an end in Crisp County more than 9 hours ago. That's about 150 miles south of Atlanta. Police say they used a pit maneuver to stop his vehicle.
Okay, so the place has the Young's Asian. That's okay. These are rub and tug shops, it looks like.
As he drove down I-75. People all over the state and the nation have been reacting to this tragedy, many emotional and supportive for the victims and the Asian community. Liza Lucas is tracking it all for us as new reaction pours into the 11 Alive newsroom. Liza?
Yes, Sheba, that hashtag Stop Asian Hate is circulating widely across social media this morning amidst the calls for prayers and support, also calls for action. And some of our local leaders, including Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, have been sharing his prayers for the family. We heard also a tweet coming down from Senator Raphael Warnock overnight, who said his heart is broken after these tragic events. And AG Chris Carr calling for justice in these cases. This is something we've been following throughout the course of the night, and we want to bring you to the attention of one of those tweets that came in. Jeremy Lin, former Hawks player, you can see his tweet right there. He says, "To my Asian American family, please take time to grieve, but know you're loved, seen, and important. We have to speaking out against violence and racism."
Has nothing to do with racism.
Caution. The units are trained to respond to active shooter incidents and stop any potential attacks.
Okay, it has nothing to do with racism.
You declared the school should...
New developments coming out of Cherokee County just in the last few minutes here. Deputies said that they have taken the man. Investigators said opened fire inside a Cherokee County business off of Highway 92 in Georgia, killing 4 and injuring 1 other person into custody in Crisp County. This is Robert Aaron Long. He's 21 years old from Woodstock. He was named by deputies just after 8:30 p.m. as a suspect in the deadly shooting. Minutes later, officials confirmed that he was taken into custody in Crisp County. You're seeing right here surveillance video from earlier today. These are images showing him getting into his 4-door SUV. There's a few photos that they were investigating and looking at here. It shows him fleeing the scene around 4:50 today. Deputies said that the scene was a massage parlor along Interstate 92. This is about a mile west of Woodstock, where Robert Aaron Long is from. Details surrounding the actual shooting have not been released at this time. But there's definitely a traffic situation out there. Sheriff's Office asking people to avoid that entire area, but these are pretty remarkable images that were released on the road. Here's a live look right now of people in a press conference not too long ago. We want to bring that to you here on News Now.
I'll start off by telling you what we have. Once we get in, if you want to go into some more details, I'll turn it over to Chief Hampton.
Okay, let's get some background on Eroticized RAGE.
What is going on? It's Jack here. So I want to talk to you about eroticized anger. When you're engaging in sex and your sexual behaviors, are you doing it because you're genuinely aroused, or are you really very angry? If you're a sex addict or a porn addict, this is going to help you so much in understanding your issue and walking down that long, confusing path to recovery. Eroticized anger is the idea that as sex addicts, he or she will use sex to deal with emotional pain. There's a part of you that is struggling emotionally. Maybe you've had trauma or you have negative beliefs about sex, and this will come out in the behaviors that you indulge in. And it's important to say that not everybody who engages in angry or violent sex is damaged or emotionally traumatized. Make-up sex is a very popular thing, right? It's a well-known thing too. A lot of people do it. Human beings enjoy their sexuality in all different sorts of ways, so it's important not to generalize. But the issue becomes not when you're doing these things because you enjoy them, but because there's something inside you that is in pain and you're trying to either lash out at someone or get away from something. So I'll give you a couple of examples. It could be the girl at school that was bullied by the boys because they thought she was ugly. So now she works as a prostitute because she enjoys the power of having a man's desire and controlling that. It could be the young man who has issues with his mother. Perhaps she beat him. Perhaps she was overly critical or overbearing. And now he has a horrible porn habit because he's angry with her and he's trying to punish women through his porn abuse. It could be the husband that can't hit his wife, so he goes to a prostitute and takes it out on her. It can be all these different things, and it can be small things too. It can be passive-aggressive things like withholding sex or insulting your partner's body, all these different things. The best thing to do, if you recognize that you're motivated by negative emotions and you're not enjoying your sex life, is to begin to look at the patterns inside yourself and think, okay, I have this thing going on where every time this happens, I feel really angry and I want to do this. Whatever that may be. It could be going to a strip club. It could be paying an escort. It could be engaging in sex work yourself, watching porn, whatever. And then ask yourself, when was the first time I felt this way? When did I feel angry about either the way I relate with the world or the way I relate with sexuality and the opposite sex or the sex that you're attracted to? And gradually over time, you'll start to notice there's a pattern. It can go back to childhood. It can be your teenage years, but there will normally be some sort of core unconscious belief that you have about either yourself or the people that you're trying to relate with. So that's it from me, guys. Think.
That was easy.
Hi, I'm Luke. I'm a sexual addict. This is a interactive show, so I welcome your questions at every point. So a love addict is someone who wasn't loved as a child or as a baby and developed the fantasy that a rescuer would come along. And in a lot of the literature, this is associated with women. Supposedly women are more likely to be love addicts. I'm not an expert on addiction.
This is from November 2012.
I remember from age 1 to 4, my mother was dying of cancer, and so I didn't really have parents for those 3 years, so I had a lot of different caretakers. And I remember some of them was good and some of them was bad, but they were all fleeting. I'd stay somewhere for a few weeks, and another place for a couple of months, and another place for...
Whoa, big super chat from Josh Randall, $60. Let's get this party started. Thank you so much, Josh, for your ongoing support of the show.
a week, another place for a month. And so they all left. And so I guess you could say I had an old fear of abandonment. I was an angry, unhappy kid. Around the age of 7, I think, when I started reading, I would develop the habit of telling myself stories, like great adventure stories, where my life suddenly became imbued with meaning and became exciting and filled with love. And I could just like sit in a chair and start telling me a story where I was the hero. And I'd feel euphoric within a few minutes. And that euphoria could carry me for hours. So even though my reality was unhappy, I had this trick to take myself very quickly into euphoria. And
okay, so we often learn coping mechanisms. We learn ways of taking ourselves to euphoria when we're fundamentally unhappy, and this lasts for a little while, but it doesn't last for long, and then you revert back to your normal level of unhappiness. So for me, it would be telling myself stories, fantasies. First, they were adventure fantasies when I was 6, 7. Then about age 8 or so, they start becoming increasingly sexual fantasies. And so I could just bliss out by thinking about girls. Now, are these all just natural urges? Isn't this what makes us tick? All right, we all have certain natural urges. We have natural urges to have sex. We have natural urges for a romantic partner. We have natural urges to accumulate material security, to have physical safety, to establish ourselves in the world, to build prestige, to have power in the world. All right, so these are basic instincts. You can just call this self-will. And as long as these instincts are under control, all right, that's fine. They're just providing you with the fuel to go through life. If you didn't have these basic instincts for sex, for material security, and for social prestige, you wouldn't get up in the morning and do much work. But if these instincts get out of control, then your life can spin out of control. So let's say I have an instinct, I want prestige, okay? I want status. But if that gets out of control so that I start spending money on, say, new headshots for my website, or I start spending money on, oh, I need to buy time on this radio station so I can be a real live talk radio host, and I start spending a lot of money in a self-destructive manner. So I'm spending money that I can't really afford to try to make myself feel more prestigious. My instinct then for prestige has overwhelmed my best interests. So too, we all have a sexual instinct, but if I went around sleeping with the wrong kind of women, I would damage my reputation in my community. I might get an STD. I might even put my life at risk. I might lose friends. So if your sex life is out of control, it can warp your life. Now, it's great to save money, to develop a plan for retirement, to make yourself physically safe and financially safe. But if the way you go about that means that you become a miser, that you become trying to squeeze every nickel you can out of every interaction, you'll lose friends, you'll lose status in the community, you might alienate your wife or a potential wife. So all these basic instincts, our self-will, if they're kept within check, okay, then they're just fuel for our lives. But for an addict, someone who's fundamentally depressed and miserable, and they uncover that indulging a certain instinct takes them out of their misery, all right, and so they start reverting to alcohol or drugs or the pursuit of sex out of all proportion to their own best interests, then you have a problem. So nothing inherently wrong with having a desire for prestige or for money or for physical safety, financial safety, for having sex and love. All these are great things, but if you pursue them to such an extent that you destroy your life, that you destroy other things in your life, then these basic instincts are out of control. So some people, they have work that they need to do. They have obligations that they need to meet for other people, but they're so lost in their fantasies, or they're so lost in playing online poker, or they're so lost in their drinking and drugging that they're unable to meet their obligations, so they get fired, they alienate themselves from other people. In that sort of situation, your instincts are run riot.
I developed this yearning for a rescue. And I had enough instances of rescue to know that it was possible to feel whole. It was possible to feel good. It was possible to feel loved and connected and normal. Like I might have a teacher giving me a little extra attention, perhaps lending me some books. I might play with other kids normally for a while and feel like I was connected to them. I'd read a good book and get taken away on a fantasy and a story, and my wretchedness would kind of leave as I took myself to Treasure Island, or Coral Island was another book I read, or these William stories about this mischievous boy in England in the 1930s. I loved those, so I learned that reading could take me away and fantasy could take me away. I started writing at about age 8, and I kind of learned that could take me away. I started writing a diary, but then...
So here I'm talking about a life that was fueled by living in delusion, living in fantasy, and that's not really served me well overall. I was heading in a direction of the type of guy who stands at the end of the bar telling you about what he might have been.
Now back to our top story on 11 Alive tonight. A white man is in police custody accused of killing 8 people at 3 spas in Cherokee and Fulton counties.
We know 6 of the victims were Asian women. A white man and white woman were also killed. The suspect arrested about 150 miles outside of Atlanta last night. We have team coverage for you tonight. We're hearing from the Asian American Pacific Islander community and people who knew the victims. We begin though with Brittany Kleinpeter, who's live at the spa in Cherokee County where the suspect first opened fire. Brittany?
There's been a steady flow of people coming in and out of the businesses nearby the spa here in Cherokee County, and we have been seeing people stop by adding things to a memorial as far as flowers, signs, teddy bears, and it has been business as usual as far as the surrounding businesses. But tonight, police are sharing more into the insight of what could have motivated this man to do what he did yesterday.
He understood
the gravity of it, and he was pretty much fed up.
Local and federal law enforcement agencies pieced together what happened after 8 people were killed in a shooting spree targeting 3 Metro Atlanta spas Tuesday evening. The first shooting happened just after 5 p.m. at Young's Asian Massage, where 4 people were killed, a bullet going through the business next door.
They was like, oh, it's very screaming, and I told to my cousin, hey, you can see what happened with them. Maybe they need help.
Just 45 minutes later, 4 more people killed in a second and third shooting at spas across the street from one another.
Young's Asian Massage? What are they trying to tell us there?
On Piedmont in Midtown Atlanta. Police saying they quickly identified Robert Long as the suspect after they put out surveillance photos of the gunman.
So a lot of live streamers, they make their living by appealing to the worst in people. And same too with the sex workers. They're essentially making their living by appealing to the worst in people. On the other hand, it's a little more challenging, but you can also try to have a go appealing to the best in people. Thank you so much, Josh Randall, $25 super chat. Congrats for staying on the path. Look forward to live streams. Most of us have never had a transformation like that. Yeah, Young's Asian Massage. That sounds like a legit place.
And Long's family contacted them. Law enforcement said that they then used Long's phone to track him down and arrest him in Chris.
So there are consequences for when you primarily appeal to the worst in people, right? Most porn stars would not like to be locked in a room with their fans. And people who work in rub and tug shops, they're appealing to the worst in people.
County last night. Today, he's being held at the Cherokee County Detention Center. Investigators telling NBC Long purchased the gun legally yesterday in Georgia. In a press conference today, the Cherokee County Sheriff said Long has admitted to the crimes and told investigators he's a sex addict.
He apparently has an issue, what he considers a sex addiction, and sees these locations.
And almost every man has been humiliated by women. It's the man's duty to ask women out. All right, it's up to a man. If a man doesn't initiate, there's going to be no reproduction in the world. So it's up to men to ask a woman out, to try to marry her, to try to get into her bed, to try to form a relationship with her. The obligation is on the man. And so men will repeatedly get turned down. And so for most men, much of their experience with women is humiliation. And guess what? This humiliation will often fuel rage.
As something that allows him to go to these places, and it's a temptation for him that he wanted to eliminate.
Law enforcement also saying Long told them he was headed to Florida to commit similar crimes when he was arrested.
It really speaks to the coordination and the quick response from law enforcement. This could have been significantly worse.
Long, a 2017 graduate of Sequoia High School. Crabapple First Baptist Church telling us Long was a member, releasing a statement saying, "We grieve for the victims and their families, and we continue to pray for them. Moreover, we are distraught for the Long family and continue to pray for them as well." Long is expected to make his first court appearance tomorrow in front of a judge for the first time.
So there's no religious cure for addiction. Most people are not going to overcome their addiction by becoming more religious, right? You can study the Bible, you can study Torah, you can go to church. This guy has had a very moving testimony online about how Jesus Christ had transformed his life. But religion is religion. It's not going to help you overcome addiction. It's not going to do the trick. You're not going to just become more religious and then get your addiction under control.
That was easy.
So I took a one-man play course, and this is from the one-man play course in November of 2012 with the great teacher Terry Silverman.
Hi, I'm Luke. I'm a sex and love addict.
Whoops, no, we already did this. Come on.
There's another book I read, or these William stories about this mischievous boy in England in like the 1930s. I love those. So I learned that like reading could take me away and fantasy could take me away. And I started writing at about age 8, and I kind of learned that could take me away. I started writing a diary, but then someone kept reading it, so I quit that about age 14 because I get interrogated about why I seem so unhappy in my diary.
Who was the someone that kept reading?
It's okay, it's interactive. I said it's interactive.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
My mistake. Yeah, it's interactive. Someone close to me, I don't want to name them, but someone in my life. So I stopped writing diary about age 14, but I would try to write novels. I remember when I was 12, I started jogging, and I finished 5 marathons when I was 12. So a marathon's 26 miles, 385 yards. And back when I ran, that would kind of take me away from my misery. I was a pretty lonely kid, disconnected from others. And so I remember writing this novel about me, essentially, as a protagonist winning the Olympic marathon and coming into the finish line, like in world record time, and the finish line's on a track, and the stadium's filled with people, and the girl I love is there. And after I crossed the finish line, I dropped dead of a heart attack. And she sees how much I love her. I think that's it. I've won the Olympic marathon. She sees how great I am and how much I love her. Like that was kind of the underlying.
And then I dropped dead. Okay, so when I talk about Richard Spencer being a romantic in the way he views the world, that's also much of the way that I viewed the world, that I would try to read into reality far more than is really there, imagine myself capable of all sorts of feats that I was not really capable of, and imagining that reality was affirming my fantasies. Doesn't always work out so well. So human beings are not very loving species, particularly when they make love, noted the late UCLA psychiatrist Dr. Robert Stoller, who wrote a lot of books on this theme. So I moved to Los Angeles in 1994, and Dennis Prager had praised these books by Robert Stoller on sexual excitement. So I read a couple of these Stoller books, one, Sexual Excitement, Dynamics of the Erotic Life. And then Stoller wrote a book on the porn industry. He writes about it in Perversion, the Erotic Form of Hatred. So I read these books by Robert Stoller in 1994, 1995, and that's when I decided, hey, I should write more about this. So perversion is essentially the interplay between hostility and sexual desire. So people with perversions feel an unending sense of being dirty, of being sinful, secretive, abnormal, a threat to those finer, unperverse citizens who are supposed to make up the majority of society. So that's pretty much how I've lived my life until the last few years. So most people don't want to recognize their own perverse tendencies. They prefer to point out scapegoats. That guy's a pervert. And these scapegoats, these perverts, liberate the rest of us in that they serve as the objects of our own unacceptable and projected perverse tendency. So the desire to dirty the partner, to sin, is essential to sexual excitement. That unsavory sense of sin, right? That's what powers perversion. So perversion is the erotic form of hatred. It is a fantasy. It is often acted out. Occasionally it's restricted to a daydream, either self-produced or packaged by others, which is pornography. So perversion is a habitual, preferred daydream, necessary for one's full satisfaction. You can also call it a love map. And it's primarily motivated by hostility. Hostility, a state where you wish to harm the object of your desire. So it's a little different from aggression, which only implies force. So the hostility in perversion is a fantasy of revenge hidden in the actions that make up the perversion. And then this scenario, this role-playing, serves to convert childhood trauma to adult triumph. So in my life, I had known a great deal of humiliation, particularly at the hands of women, particularly at the hands of some of my female caregivers. And so to overcome that, I developed this elaborate fantasy life where I had the power and the women were helpless before me. So to create the greatest excitement, the perversion must portray itself as an act of risk-taking, that you're taking your life in your hands, so to speak. And then one's sexual object becomes dehumanized because you're using them as an object to play out your own fantasies. So this can play out as rape, it can play out as a preference for prostitutes, or simply compulsive promiscuity as a Don Juan syndrome or as nymphomania. Now, a naive observer would say, hey, this is just heterosexual enthusiasm. The object of your affections, after all, is a human being, it's a personality. But the perverse person does not see the fullness of the humanity of their object of desire. They just see anatomy or cliched fragments of personality, such as, oh, what a piece of ass, or all men are brutes. So the whole delight in perversion is caused by the destruction, humiliation, desecration, definition of the perverse individual himself and his partner. So if perversion is the result of threat and hatred and humiliation, where is the pleasure? Where does that come from? So unmitigated trauma, humiliation, frustration, there's no lust in that and no rage. But pleasure is released only when it is turned into fantasy. That makes the perversion uniquely human. When you turn your humiliation, your trauma, your frustration into a fantasy where you end up winning. So with the fantasy, the trauma is undone. The humiliation is undone. Your childhood is undone. And so you construct this elaborate storyline of fantasy where there has to be risk in the storyline, or there's not much excitement. So essentially, you are threading your way through an erotic minefield. So you either carry this out in your daydream, or you try to role play it with a willing or unwilling partner, depending on the situation. So daydreams create a plea, a way of please relieve me of my humiliation, my fear, my trauma. The daydream always contains considerable elements of risk, which introduces considerable elements of excitement and tension. And the daydream always guarantees a happy ending. Saying this time, one has not only overcome the trauma and the humiliation and the risk, but you have overcome and thwarted your original attackers. And then when the daydream becomes attached to genital excitement and to orgasm, the whole rightness and righteousness of the daydream is reinforced, and you then feel cleansed, you then feel powerful, you've overcome your trauma, and you're motivated to repeat the experience again.
Themes of my stories. I remember my fifth grade teacher wrote in my score report, Luke is always very willing to share his opinions with the class, but he needs to learn to be more considerate of his lower thinker. So I would use my brain and my verbal ability to make fun of people. And that didn't tend to endear me. I was about
typing in the
9 or
background on a
10.
laptop to give me notes.
I was with my one friend, Wayne, and he had like 6 older brother and sisters. He was the youngest, I was the youngest. I had an older brother and sister, but they'd already left home, so I'd essentially been like an only child most of my life. And his older brother was living in a caravan outside the house, and Wayne knew that his older brother had porn magazines, so he went in there one day, like got his porn magazines, and we went out into the bush, and like we looked at them, and they're just like amazing. It was like, you know, I just flushed so bright, so red, like my pulse raced. You know, I was a preacher's kid. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist minister's son, a Bible scholar's son, a Christian evangelist's son. And growing up in the Seventh-day Adventist community of Avondale College in New South Wales, Australia, 2 hours north of Sydney. And I was looking at porn, and like these naked women just like spreading themselves out in the gorgeous lighting, apparently feeling no shame. It was just amazing. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen, and it had more of an effect on making my endorphins pop, or making my heart race, or making me feel just really excited about life. And then he went and returned the magazines to Brian's trailer, and his mother came out, and she said, "You're not looking at Brian's magazines, are you?" And we were busted. And I had so much fright, so much shame, because I had a lot of corporal punishment. Like, when I misbehaved, you know, I got swatted. I could either get swatted out of...
Yeah, taking a risk, that's essential to the excitement.
We did interview him last night. He is currently in our facility at the Cherokee County Adult Detention Center. We were able to interview him with the Atlanta Police Department and FBI. He made indicators that he has some issues, potentially sexual addiction, and may have frequented some of these places in the past. But as the chief indicated, it's still early on. We still have a lot of things to process, and so he should be at an arraignment tomorrow at some time early morning to late morning, and we will keep you up to date. We have a press release that Captain Baker has put together, available to our media folks. If you don't have that, I think we have some printed copies that he'll be happy to give to you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have at the moment.
So are you saying, when you talk to the suspect, he says he has a sexual addiction issue, but I'm sure you asked him, was this racially motivated? Was this racially motivated?
As the chief indicated, it's still early, but the indicators right now are it may not be. It may be targets of opportunity. Again, we believe that he frequented these places in the past and may have been lashing out, and part of that is in your media packet as well.
But the working theory is a sexual addiction issue rather than a racial profile.
During our interviews, we asked that specific question, and that did not appear to be the motive.
Questions till the athlete let him get through.
Thank you.
Impulsive anger, and just like whack, and I'd get flying across the room. Or I got, the very methodical swatting where I'd get told what I did wrong, why this is for my benefit, and why this hurts the inflictor of the pain more than it does me, but that I would not be able to sit down for a week and drop my pants and whack, whack, whack. And if you cry, I'm going to hit you twice as much. Whack, 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 whack. So I was afraid of getting a good thrashing. It was, it would have been the worst thing I could possibly do. I grew up in a conservative Christian environment.
Okay,
so it was the worst sin, so I just committed the worst sin. I was like 9 or 10, and I was really going to get it. I thank the good Lord, my friend's mother talked to us and said, I'm not going to tell your parents, and you got to not do that again, and that can ruin your life. And she didn't tell my parents. I was so kind of afraid of the whole thing, and so afraid of my visceral reaction to looking at pictures of naked women. But I deliberately did not look at Playboy or any other kind of nudie magazine until I was 16. So
wow, what a righteous guy. That's about 8 years there, free.
Okay, shalom, shalom. Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Bakadash. Come on, to the apostles and to the elders about the spiritual.
Okay, that guy's not good. Come on, man.
I stopped, like sheer force of will, because I really wanted to look, but I didn't look. So from like age 10 to age 16, kept it pure. Didn't go there, because I knew how much I loved it. Like I kind of had a sense early on that I was an addict. The addict, and whether it's an addict to alcohol or drugs or porn, like has certain fundamental beliefs. The addict feels that he's irretrievably bad. That's what I felt from my earliest memories, that I was irretrievably bad. Like one of my few memories of my mother, she died of cancer before I turned 4, was I'd broken into my sister's perfume collection in the bathroom, and I smeared it all over myself in the bathroom and mixed it with toothpaste. Just like made this big mess. And like my sister caught me and she started really wailing on me. And my mother was like crawling out of her sick bed to kind of throw herself over me to ward off the blows and says, "He's just a little boy, he doesn't know what he's doing." So I had the sense that I was irretrievably rotten. And I guess the way I heard the religious messages was that I was irretrievably rotten and that we all were, but I'm sure lots of other people who grew up in the same sort of environment that I did didn't go out thinking that they were irretrievably rotten, not the same way I did, but maybe I misinterpreted things. Then the other essential characteristic of the addict is that you don't believe that through normal human interaction you can meet your needs. Like just normal life is not going to be enough to meet your needs. And then
So yeah, not one woman. One woman's not going to be enough to meet my needs. I need to be with as many as possible.
So thanks to some good police work and a full confession by the suspect, some 24 hours later, just barely 24 hours later, we know the who, the when, and the why of the Atlanta spa murders. Robert Aaron Long, 21 years of age, to friends and family. He was a devout Christian, kind of kept to himself. Someone would even say nerdy. He lived a double life, a life that was fraught with temptation. He could not coexist in normal relationships with women. It seemed like he had a complete addiction to pornography, an addiction to the temptation of massage parlors and spas. And he thought, how best can I reset the slate? How best can I keep from giving into this temptation? Well, I'm going to eliminate the temptation. And as crazy as that sounds, and I do feel like mental illness obviously comes into play, this is what he thought he needed to do, and he set about doing it. And as heinous and horrible as the 8 murders are, which we now know 6 of those are confirmed to be workers in the spas, 2 of those were customers, He was on his way to do more. He was on his way to Florida and would have went spa by spa, massage parlor by massage parlor until he was stopped. He was stopped about 150 miles away from Atlanta. This is a straight up case, essentially, of a serial killer. This was a person who thought nothing of the lives that he took. They were just purveyors of sin in his estimation, and they needed to be killed. Now, again, these were reputable businesses. Customers that were in there was a husband and wife that was in there for a couple's massage, a massage only. And that to him was enough of a temptation. Just a woman massaging his body was too much of a temptation that he could not handle, that he had to eliminate that. Now, we know, here's one of the victims, the first photo that has come forward of Miss Yawn. She was there for a massage, a client who was gunned down. The only thing that we can rule out is that it was racism. It was more or less good versus evil in this demented, sad mind of Robert Aaron Long. I am a Christian. I know many of my friends that are Christians. I have friends that are atheists, Buddhists, and all over the spectrum. Nothing about this is Christian. Nothing about this is doing the right thing. You win people to Christ through love. You win people to Christ through your dedication, letting your light shine, letting people see the difference in your life, witnessing to them, not this, not violence. And so if anybody happens to hear my voice on this video and thinks, oh yeah, more power to him, you are wrong, you are evil, and there is nothing about you that is Christian.
So I want to find the video of this kid giving his testimonial about turning his life over to Christ. So if you can find that video, please throw a link down. It was the first result in his name under videos, but the church took it down. So think of the Don Juan. So that paradigm of promiscuity, he reveals his hatred of women very innocently. And his interests essentially are in just using women, in seduction, not in love, and then telling his friends about how many women he's had, how they degraded themselves to induce his passion. So his excitement and his gratification do not come from the sensual pleasures of the sexual act or the intimacy that he might have established. In fact, he shows little interest in intercourse. His concentration is overcoming the resistance of an apparently reluctant woman. So easy women do not attract him. His unending, frantic need to prove himself, his gratification only comes in the numbers of his conquests. His body is more in the service of power than eroticism. So think about the movie Dangerous Liaisons. Each of the many genres of pornography is created for a specific perverse need by exact attention to detail, thus defines an area of excitement that will have no effect on a completely different person. So a sadist, for example, will choose depictions of sadistic acts. A fetishist will choose depictions of, say, cross-dressing. With all perversions, pornography is a matter of aesthetics. One man's delight is another man's boredom. And with all perversions, at its heart is a fantasied act of revenge, condensing itself in the subject's sexual life history, his memories, his fantasies, his traumas, frustrations, humiliations, and joys. There is always a victim, no matter how disguised. No victim, no pornography. No victim, no sexual fantasy. Now, most people have sexual fantasies. Many people have eroticized rage, and they don't take it to the level of killing people. But no victim, no pornography. No victim, no erotic daydream. No victim, no sexual fantasy. So pornography is essentially restitution. It is restitution for the humiliations and suffering and loss that a man has experienced. So the creation and use of pornography are ritualized acts. Any deviations from a narrow prescribed path will produce decreased sexual excitement. So the perversion is the necessary preserver of potency. So pornography is a story. It's a chronicle. It's a manifest, complex daydream that builds over years, over fantasies. Each elaboration occurs at the moment when a piece of pain or incomplete pleasure is converted, transformed, transmuted into greater pleasure, till all these fantasies, like building blocks, have been assembled to create the adult perversion that then finally presents itself overtly in the daydream or the pornography. There is a grain of historical reality embedded in each fantasy, and the differences between what actually happened and the fantasy, these are just minor variations. Okay, you'll find a whole assembly of people who have one very particular perversion. Now, for the addict, for the pervert, unfortunately for him, he has to repeat this endlessly because he knows in his head that his perversion is only a construction, it's only a fantasy. he can never truly prove that he has won, that he has conquered, that he's overcome those who've humiliated him. It only works for a moment. And each time in his life that circumstances arise to echo the original trauma, the original humiliation, he can placate his anxiety only in repeating this whole perverse act. He's got to thread his way through an erotic minefield to get satisfaction, to tell himself that he is in fact intact and that he is really a winner. He's the victor. So an essential quality in virtually all pornography and in all perversion is sadism. It's revenge for a passively experienced trauma like humiliation or loss.
The third characteristic of the addict, as I understand it, is that there is something out there that will meet your needs, that's reliable, that you can turn to meet your needs. So my addictions help me get through difficult times, because by throwing myself into fantasy, I could get a euphoric state. By looking at porn, I could get a euphoric state. By falling in love, I could have a euphoric state. By just fantasizing about love, I could feel euphoria. Thinking about rescue, imagining that someone or something could rescue me, that would give me a euphoric state. And so for me, it was processes that I became addicted to, and they helped me get through difficult times. When I was an unhappy, sad, lonely kid and no one wanted to play with me, I got the fantasy that I was this cool, great kid who was like doing something great for the Lord, doing something great for this world. And I read a lot of books about Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and Winston Churchill, and I had imagined this world-transforming career for myself. So, for me, grandiosity is being one of my favorite protections from shame and feeling wretched. So I can imagine myself as really grand. Or to find those things that I could be grand at, or imagine that I'm grand at, throw myself into those activities. When I was running marathons at age 12, now look, 12-year-olds are running marathons. I was the only 12-year-old in marathons with 10,000 people. And I thought I was really grand. So I had this idea that I had an addictive personality. I was an extremist, running marathons at age 12. I'd read a lot of books. When I find an author that I liked, I'd read all their books. But I really didn't understand what I meant an addictive personality.
So apparently Robert Aaron Long, the shooter, apparently he'd had a bad day.
The investigators that interviewed him this morning, they got that impression that, yes, he understood the gravity of it, and he was pretty much fed up and kind of at the end of his rope, and yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did.
Remorseful?
I'm not going to go to I don't know if he was remorseful or not.
He's a pretty young guy. This is a sheriff's officer talking about the murderer, Robert Aaron Long, and describing him as having a bad day. And this was at the press conference that took place just a few moments ago. And I want to play a couple more clips because this was not even the worst part of it. This was just actually, I want you to take a listen into how white supremacists, even murderers, are protected in the system despite the gravity of what they've done. The first officer described him as having a bad day. Listen to this next one because it is just as offensive.
We did interview him last night. He is currently in our facility at the Cherokee County Adult Detention Center. We were able to interview him with the Atlanta Police Department and FBI. He made indicators that he has some issues, potentially sexual addiction, and may have frequented some of these places in the past. But as the chief indicated, it's still early on. We still have a lot of things to process, and so he should be at an arraignment tomorrow at sometime early morning.
He had issues, and he had a sexual addiction. Right? So already the system is starting to craft a narrative to label him as some type of person with mental issues, because every time a white person commits these type of terrorist acts, they are always lumped together and blamed on mental health, vilifying the mental health community, right? And now they're also making excuses, any excuse they possibly can, to excuse or to justify or to separate it. More importantly, they're trying to separate it from the fact that this was a hate crime. Listen to this next clip.
So are you saying, you talked about stuff, he said he had sexual addiction, but I'm sure you asked him, was this racially motivated? Was this racially motivated?
As the chief indicated, it's still early, but the indicators right now are, it may not be. It may be targets of opportunity. Again, we believe that he frequented these places in the past and may have been lashing out, and part of that is in your media packet as well.
But it wasn't during a sexual addiction issue rather than a racial profile?
During our interviews, we asked that specific question, and that did not appear to be the motive for.
Oh, so you're trying to tell me that a racist doesn't want to claim that he's a racist, and so he's going to blame it on sexual addiction, as though sexual addiction or whatever, or sexual domination is not part of white supremacy itself. There's a tweet I want to share with you later on that actually unpacks that way better than I'm qualified to unpack it. But the absurdity of it, the sheer absurdity of it, for them to take him at his word, despite the fact that 8 people were killed, 6 of whom were Asian women, in a time when this country has seen an uptick in violence against Asian people in this country, specifically because of the way this political system, particularly Republican Party, conservatives, and Donald Trump, blame.
Yeah. Now, who's generally committing this violence against Asian people? Is it, generally speaking, white supremacists? Anyway, The Onion has weighed in. Atlanta police rule out mass shooting as cause of death after suspect says he didn't shoot anyone. In a press conference updating the public on the ongoing investigation, the Atlanta Police Department revealed Wednesday that they ruled out mass shooting as a cause of death after the 21-year-old suspect told officers he didn't shoot anyone. Following an exhaustive interrogation in which we repeatedly asked the subject if he shot anyone and received a definitive no, we can discard our first assumption that this was a mass shooting-based crime, said Captain J. Baker, stressing that although his team was working around the clock on where to go from here, this development placed them decisively back at square one. Of course, some will question our approach. That's why we did our due diligence several times if he was absolutely sure, because it would look really bad if we didn't follow every loose end. But he told us he was positive that he didn't shoot anyone. That was really reassuring for the whole force. He was there at the massage parlors after all. Who knows what happened better than him? Reynolds added that as an extra precaution, the suspect would need to sign his own statement saying he hadn't shot anyone before they dismissed his charges and let him head home. The Onion also reports, sympathetic police know what it's like to have a bad day and kill 8 people. Hey, disavow. Okay, so for the pornographer, he generally speaking, he works to make money. And so he is motivated in the highest to develop an erotic daydream that is not idiosyncratic. So for his pornography to pay, he must intuitively extract out of what he knows about his audience those features that they all share in common. If he does not, he runs the risk of only selling one copy. So when I was making What Women Want, I mean, just like with these shows, I do it with the audience in mind. I do it with you in mind. He therefore has to create a work precise enough to excite and general enough to excite many. Thus, pornography is for the researcher sort of statistical study of psychodynamics, a more colorful, more powerful method than the opinion poll that is sometimes foisted on us as rigorous research. So what do varying pornographies have in common? There's the evocation of danger, humiliation, anxiety, fear, frustration, surmounted, right? There's humiliation and frustration lurking, but it's surmounted. So all pornography contains the psychodynamics of perversion. There is no non-perverse pornography. Sexually exciting material in which it's not shot-filled with hostility. So just like all humor is underlain by hostility, so too all porn is underlain by hostility. Pornography spares one the anxieties of having to make it with another human being. The people on the printed page or in the video, they know their place and they do as directed. Pornography may not simply be a substitute. It exists because it fills voyeuristic, sadomasochistic needs that in some people cannot be satisfied no matter how many willing sexual partners are available. Very popular in pornography are descriptions of a woman who starts out cool, superior, sophisticated, and uninterested. Yeah, that's true of my fantasies. But is swept away by the precisely described activities of the powerful man who sweeps her away into a state of lust. She experiences a monumental loss of control. So one easily sees therein a power struggle disguised as sexuality. The dangerous woman, dangerous in that she looks like she's going to humiliate you and knock you back. And now she is reduced to a victim. And the boy, by means of the pornography, by means of the illusion of power, becomes the man. So the essential dynamic in pornography is hostility. What differentiates more perverse and less perverse forms of pornography, as between perversion and normality, is the degree of hostility, the degree of hatred, the degree of revenge fantasies bound or released in the sexual activity. Can men in particular ever have powerful sexual excitement without brutality also being present? Even if it's minimal, repressed, distorted by reaction formation, attenuated, or overt in only the most pathological cases. Can humor exist without hostility? In humor, the hostility is not simply tacked on, but is a sine qua non.
I didn't start regular psychotherapy until 1998, after I lost all my friends, and I decided to write an unauthorized biography of my hero, Dr. Ellis, the author Dennis Prager. So I'm a love addict. I dream of rescue. The love addict fantasizes that there are powerful, capable people out there who can rescue him. Dennis Prager, lucky enough to be a long line of people that I imagined could rescue me.
started listening to him on the radio in 1988, and the typical love addict, I became obsessed.
And a question in the chat, what do I think about Milo being ex-gay? I think it's absolutely possible for somebody to stop performing certain sexual acts. So, yeah, I think it's possible that Milo has stopped having sex with men. And so, yeah, I think that men and women can choose to stop performing or stop participating in certain sexual acts or any sexual acts, so that wouldn't shock me. I also think that most quote-unquote gay men have had sex with women. So most gay men are capable of sex with women. And so I think a substantial portion of gay men are capable of becoming heterosexually functioning, that they can restrict their sexual activity to one wife. It may require some therapy.
And there's a rescue out there. If I can just get close to Dennis, I can be rescued. And so I went to the synagogue that Dennis went to, and developed many friends that had in common with Dennis. And I got the idea that I wanted to write this biography of Dennis Prager. And my friend said, Luke, if you do that, we'll never talk to you again. I said, well, I've grown up with that Protestant idea of martyrdom. A Man for All Seasons, the 1966 Oscar winner, and the guy was a martyr, the protagonist for his beliefs. Like, Protestants, were always martyring themselves for their beliefs, and I'm going to martyr myself for my belief. I'm going to write the biography of Dennis Prager. I lost all my friends.
Can I ask who Dennis Prager is?
He's a radio talk show host, and he's an author of books on Judaism.
And why did your friends not want to be friends with you if you wrote that book?
Because Dennis didn't want this. And so this was a threat to Dennis's well-being. And they took their cues from Dennis.
Is it in Australia?
This is in Los Angeles.
Why not?
I moved to California in 1977, and I moved permanently to Los Angeles in 1994. So I lost all my friends at the end of 1997. When I made some money in early 1998 by writing on the porn industry, I invested it into psychotherapy with someone I went to synagogue with. I called her up and said, hey, I know you socially, but are you okay with me going to therapy with you? She said, I'm okay with it. Are you okay with it? I said, I'm okay with it. So I went into weekly psychotherapy, back-to-back sessions, an hour and a half on Fridays. And I talked a lot about losing all my friends, and my life was kind of lurching from crisis to crisis as I was writing a daily blog on the porn industry and getting a lot of death threats.
So my therapist was concerned that I was on the verge of being a psychopath. So risk is inherent in the dynamic of revenge, writes Dr. Robert Stoller in his great work, Perversion, the Erotic Form of Hatred. So one recapitulates in fantasy an original trauma or frustration or humiliation, but now we tack on a new outcome. The new outcome is triumph. Orgasm equals triumph equals power equals you have won. Now, this attempted reversal is hazardous because one has to re-immerse yourself in the original trauma of humiliation. So for pleasure to be possible, the risk of humiliation cannot be too great. The odds cannot be high that one will experience the trauma again. Nonetheless, the perversion must simulate the original danger. That gives it excitement. So long as one keeps control, which is easy if it's one's fantasy, then it is a foregone conclusion, even if disguised in the story, that the risk will be surmounted. But with every love map, you are threading your way through an erotic minefield. So just as every human group has its myth, so Jews believe that God gave them the Torah, Mount Sinai, the written Torah, and the oral Torah. Christians believe that Jesus died for their sins on a cross. For every person, there is a sexual fantasy or a perversion or a love map. So this perversion, this fantasy, summarizes one's entire sexual life history. And in the manifest content of this one particular fantasy are the embedded clues to the traumas and frustrations inflicted on sexual desires in childhood by the outside world, and how you deal with that humiliation and tension. And the character structure of your fantasy are the building blocks that you use to get satisfaction from your body and from the outside world and from one's objects of erotic desire. Now, the psychoanalyst can then study this sexual fantasy and uncover the origins. So pornography is the communicated sexual fantasy of a dynamically related group of people. Increased excitement equals increased impact of one's own perversion, means increased cruelty. Modest excitement means fewer perverse elements, and minimal excitement or boredom means virtually no perversion. So sexual boredom is the result of the loss of a sense of risk. So this fantasy, this pornography does not work unless one is a little bit fearful, unless one is uncertain of a successful outcome. And this is probably true with humor as well. The committed art critics, like connoisseurs of pornography, are honestly and deeply unable to respond to a different set of expressed dynamics. They all have their preferred genre. They need a constant flow of works at the perimeter where one can imagine himself at risk for experiencing something new. Their natural enemy, the artist, has nonetheless a similar dynamic, a need for mystery and simulated risk. Sexual excitement, then, is the product of an oscillation between the possibility of failure, small, and the anticipation of triumph, which is large. The perversion is the complicated path that threads its ways through the dangers to triumphant sexual gratification. So you'll be thinking, what am I doing that endangers me with society, with my outer reality? If I'm caught, there's going to be trouble. Then what's typical in a fantasy, this goes against my standards, this goes against my conscience. If I am caught, I shall hate myself. What I am doing is what my parents told me was very bad when I was little. Nice children don't do this. Fourth, I am filled with hatred and I must not know it. Because they, the adults, so frustrated, mystified me, humiliated me. My sexual freedom in childhood was taken from me. They imposed all these restrictions on me. They tormented me, and I was made responsible. I sense the temptation. I prevent my own actions. I am to love and respect them. It is wrong for me to hate them. My sexual desires are bad. My hatred is even worse. If my parents knew the extent of my desires and feelings, they would destroy me. But this violence is mine, part of the essential me that is evil, and yet it must be projected, preserved. It is hidden in what I desire erotically. For all this that was done to me, I shall enjoy revenge in the sexual act. If I aim to harm my object may sense this and do unto me as I would want to do unto that, and that is most risky indeed. So perversion is the hatred. It is eroticized hatred.
Getting beaten up.
How are you going to do
I would write things that made a lot of people very angry. I broke the news about a whole string of HIV infections in the porn industry and identified who was doing it. So to some people that made me a hero, to other people that made me a threat. They felt that my reporting would shut down the porn industry. I sided with those who saw me as heroic. But early on in therapy, I think my therapist said to me, what do you do when you run out in the middle of our sessions? It was usually about 40 minutes into our session, so I'm going to go to the bathroom. I run out. I said, well, I drink a lot of water, so I just have to get urinated. She said, I was just wondering if you might masturbate. I said, how did I? Because I'm telling you I'm a sex addict, but I've never left real life to go masturbate. And she asked me, do you think I might be a sex addict because I was writing on the porn industry? And I said, no, because I never do anything out of control. I never interrupt real life to masturbate. I never sacrifice my values to have sex. I mean, I've had sex with over 40 women in my life, and every single one of those women has read books recreationally. I only hang out with, talk to people who enjoy reading books. Snob, whatever it is, that's who I am. So I was never willing to sacrifice myself to have sex. I was never willing to talk to someone who I found boring, and I find people who don't read books boring, generally speaking. I was never willing to sacrifice that. I was never willing to sacrifice money, my dignity, my ethics. I've never broken the law in my pursuit of sex, never had sex with anyone underage, never had sex with a married woman. I've always thought done in completely consensual, ethical circumstances. So I said, no, I don't think I'm a sex addict. And I was in therapy with this woman for years. And when I finally started 12-stepping for sex addiction in 2011, I told her, I said, I don't think you're a sex addict. I grew up with Seventh-day Adventists. Seventh-day Adventists believe in no nicotine, no caffeine, no smoking, no drinking. Very strong preventative health message. And you get a lot of literature and stories about how alcohol and drugs are like demons that can take over your life and destroy you. So I've never tried any type of illegal drug. And I've always had contempt for people who abuse alcohol or drugs. Just part of it, I think, is just my upbringing, because that was really bad, the way I was raised. Even though I've left Seventh-day Adventism, that's still kind of imbued in me. And then, I've been in places where people coming out of their 12-step meetings, I never looked at these people and said, oh yeah, that's what I want to be like. That's where I want to be. I mean, this group, wow, look at the love and the strength, and look what they got. I mean, they look worn down by life. They look depraved, ragged. People never dressed well, seen
from 12-step readings. They're coming out drinking coffee and chain smoking. It never appealed to me. I think it was 1998 that sex addiction started hitting the news. There was a big article in the Los Angeles Times in April of 1998. Dennis Prager devoted 2 hours to his radio show. So even though I lost my friendship with Dennis Prager, I still revere him as much as ever. And I remember Dennis saying about this article, doesn't say anything about values and doesn't talk about anything about morality. Like, is sex addiction really an addiction? As in, if you paid someone $1 million to not have sex for a week or a month or a year, or to not look at porn for a month, would they be able to do it? Yeah, that makes sense.
So you can understand fetishism, perversion best as fetishism. It's kind of the model for all perversions. If you cannot bear another person's totality, you'll split them into fragments and just take the fragments and just relate to those. You'll dehumanize that object can be neutralized. You can deal with your past traumas and escape from humiliation by isolating just a neutral aspect, a fragment of that other person. And then you can displace your potential sexual response from the whole person, which is daunting, to just that part that more safely represents what you need to overcome your trauma. When fetishization is benign, as in foreplay or in variations of sexual fashions, the whole object is to be finally restored intact. So this means minimal revenge, minimal risk-taking, but you don't get full sexual satisfaction without recourse to more extreme forms of perversion. So once a body part or an inanimate related object such as a garment has been split off from the whole human object, one needs another process idealization for reinventing the new object. The hostility, the potential destruction of the object of your erotic desire, floating around in the latent fantasies that energize the perversion, must be neutralized and positively, pleasurably, erotically infused, or there will be no perversion. So in pornography, we find dehumanization, fetishization, and reinvention. So certain aspects of sexuality are chosen and focused on, just the essentials of the perversion dynamics. So even in the mildest of heterosexual pornographies, so photographs of naked women, these reduce actual women to a two-dimensional frozen creature helplessly impaled on the page. She cannot defend herself. She cannot strike back. She can't humiliate you like she could in the real world. Even if she has a dangerous look about her, that implied risk is negated by the fact that she is imprisoned on the paper or on the screen. So she can be insulted. She can be dirtied. She can be forced to act according to your will. And she must remain uncomplaining, smiling, whatever you want. She is immobile, and she's not only displayed, she's not only available for any fantasy sexual hostility, she is also idealized. She does no harm. She only brings satisfaction. She is aesthetic perfection, and if she isn't, another picture is chosen. She is retouched. She infinitely repairs herself. She demands no revenge. She is absolutely cooperative. She keeps your secrets. She costs nothing in your time or money. She does not need to be understood, and she has no needs of her own. She is ideal, but she also becomes a bore, and so you need a new picture, new video. Now, it's more difficult to get the same compliance when actually performing a perversion with someone in real life than in imagining it in pornography and daydreams. The properly planned perversion still permits one to choose objects in the real world that can be dealt with in this way. So you can have fetishism, the use of inanimate objects, or the use of prostitutes. You can have humans essentially hired to act like puppets for your perversions, or you can choose people such as a compliant wife whose own neuroses complement and find use for your perverse acts. Seduction, that is a hostile, power-seeking, fetishizing business. One who turns his objects into fetishes reduces his capacity for intimacy. So my therapist would note I was always chasing intensity rather than intimacy, because I would turn my objects into fetishes, reduce my capacity for intimacy. My inhuman dimension came to have no greater measure than that of the fetish that I would choose. Splitting, dehumanization, fetishization, idealization results from a failure of empathy and a diminished or inhibited capacity to identify with others. Or maybe this is backwards. The natural state of humans may be no more than a meager capacity for empathy with others, Maybe only a few, such as saints or artists or analysts or psychotics, have some kind of aberrant hypertrophy of this masochistic mechanism. So our culture, as do most cultures, defines masculinity by how completely one demonstrates that one is rid of the need for the mother. Sin is the desire to harm others. It's also essential to sexual excitement. Ethics and morality, then, are scales that society uses for weighing sin, and they exist to justify or mitigate hostility. So these repressive social forces may be experienced inside the individual as a sense of sin. They have their origin in attacks made by one part of oneself upon another part, such as the bite of the conscience on your sexual desires. Social forces do not just exist outdoors in the wind, but in the final common pathway for each member of society. They are present as intrapsychic dynamics. So sin and sex are linked. The badness, the strangeness, the willfully motivated corruptness, unwholesomeness, and unnaturalness that most people feel in their sexual excitement. In this, we may find our first clue in the long-known fact that an awareness that one is sinning usually increases sexual excitement. So in both perversion and in quote-unquote normal sexuality, we find several themes. As a sexual act unfolds, fantasy risks a run that are experiences being surmounted. Inside the sexual excitement are desires, conscious and unconscious, to harm others, to get revenge for past traumas and frustrations. Sexual act serves to transform childhood trauma into adult triumph. Trauma, risk, revenge establish a mood of excitement that is intensified when they are packaged as a mystery.
We buy this stuff about addiction. Concepts just seem like self-obsession. You keep coming to a break and you just talk about yourself. You know, it's just like, what's great about that? And then my biggest objection is it seemed like a moral cop-out. Like, I'm a convert to Orthodox Judaism. Like, I'm really into ethical monotheism, God-based ethics, righteousness, standards of behavior that are objective, that come from God. And I just had this sense that people come out of 12-step programs and they say, I'm an addict. I'm sorry for the way I treated you. Sorry if I ever did anything that hurt you. I realize now that I have a disease. Like, it just seemed like a cop-out. Like, I had contempt for that. I've always been active in organized religions. Started out as a bad Adventist, converted to Orthodox Judaism. And like spirituality, again, seems to me like a cop-out. Because spirituality, the way most people use it, means I want the benefits of belonging to an organized religion without paying the price. When you belong to an organized religion, there's a huge price to pay. There are all sorts of things that behaviorally you can't do, certainly not out in the open. And usually, you know, it's a monetary price. In both Adventism and Judaism, the norm is to give about 10% of your income to charity. Orthodox Judaism, very difficult way of life. Seventh-day Adventism, difficult way of life. There's the Sabbath. And so you have to give up 1/7 of your time, 1/10 of your income. Then anyone can say they're spiritual. And I can imagine it feels terribly spiritual to have sex with someone else's wife if you're both attracted to each other. I think that could be the most spiritual thing in the world. So I've never been into spirituality, never been into 12-step programs. I remember I had one relationship in my life with an alcoholic. Once knew an alcoholic well. You know, and it had its highs, it had great sex. It had its lows where, you know, she just disengaged for days and wouldn't return my calls. And I remember when she went back to rehab for the second time, and she was a fairly well-known person, and I put it on my blog. And I said, oh, this addiction is a disease stuff. You know, I don't buy it. I think addiction is a fairly immoral one. It's just not strong enough. Like, there is no gene that anyone has discovered that forces anyone to take a drink, or to snort some blow, or to watch some porn. Don't buy it.
Okay, back to Robert Stoller here on Perversion, the erotic form of hatred. So he agrees that pornography is debasing, that people would be better off if they were not perverse, that gorging on pleasure will make people frantic. Licentiousness damages the fabric of society. So there are two types of freedom. One is relative freedom from one's own neurotic unconscious demands, and this is lost in perversion. The other is the relative freedom a society can grant all its citizens. Till the family no longer functions as the primal unit in the maintenance of society, perversion will serve four necessities: the preservation of the individual's pleasure, preservation of the family, preservation of society, and the preservation of the species. Intimacy causes erotic strain so severe that the family stability is chronically endangered. So then we have a second necessity. We have perversion, which must act as a repository of conservatism to stabilize the otherwise explosive forces that are going to destroy a family. So perversion allows cruelty and hatred in the family to be contained before they become too destructive. And the resulting efficiency permits parents to secure themselves and their family by the means of the presence of this perverse child. The future homosexual man's mother may release on her little boy her bitterness towards men in general and her unsatisfying husband in particular. By being distant and accepting her scorn without argument, her husband may retain his passivity, and by developing and mimicking effeminacy, the boy can secretly despise his mother. So since the central dynamic of perversion is hostility, perversion channels murderous hatred into the calmer currents of the imagination, such as religion, art, pornography, and daydreams. These deflections are almost always preferable to the direct expression of rage. This dispersion of our rage serves four main necessities. It provides a more joyous and guilt-reduced erotic pleasure. It lowers the murder rate in families and societies. It binds into erotic pleasure and exhaustion energies that might otherwise break society wide open, and it deflects the hatred that can build up between the sexes so that, at least for a few moments, men and women can stand what too often seems each other's otherwise unbearable total presence. If all goes well for our race in the future, perhaps perversion will die down and variance increase. Perhaps someday perversion will not be necessary.
During an
Sexual
off
excitement.
period in my relationship with this alcoholic, we're chatting online, and she says, my therapist says I'm a love addict. This is December 2005. I'd never heard of the term love addict before, so I immediately Googled it. So I'm still obsessed with this girl. I'm obsessed with very capable women, because I'm obsessed with capable, period. Obsessed with capable people, period. Because I feel like they can rescue me. She was very capable, high-functioning alcoholic. Immediately, Googled love addict, read it, said, oh, yeah, I kind of fit some of this. And I checked out some books on the library and read them. It's like, yeah, I can have a lot of the tendencies of the love addict. Yeah, but I also have a lot of the tendencies of the bipolar. I'm not technically bipolar, but I have many of the characteristics of bipolar. There's many times where I feel like nothing I say or do will have consequences, and then I have the crashing lows where I feel like there's no hope. And that's kind of how I get through my life. 2008, I interview an acquaintance who read a book called Love Junkie, Rachel Resnick, for the book on love addiction. It was interesting. January 2010, I interview a woman that a rabbi friend of mine used to go out with, and she's now a sex addiction therapist. I interviewed her, and after the interview, I talked to her, and it seemed like had many of the characteristics of the sex addict. Interesting.
Okay, another great Robert Stoller book here, Sexual Excitement, Dynamics of an Erotic Life. And he notes that most everybody has a paradigmatic erotic scenario, call it a love map, which is often played out in a daydream or in a choice of pornography or in your choice of sexual or romantic partner or simply in your actions, perhaps in your styles of intercourse. And if we were to understand this love map, we'll better understand the person. Most of us, most of the time, feel of one piece. We feel united. We do not notice the seams, though artists and analysts, perhaps more alert than many others, to the fact that the whole cloth is nonetheless made up of well-joined parts. Been listening to an Audible course, Your Public Persona, Self-Presentation in Everyday Life by
Too
Mark
concerned
Leary.
with their impressions, and that it can have a dark side. They view impression management as normal and generally beneficial. People with this outlook feel quite comfortable with the fact that they manage their own impressions and that they sometimes show different aspects of themselves to different people. Other people, though, are somewhat ambivalent or even resistant to the suggestion that self-presentation is normal and beneficial. They may agree that most people are concerned with what other people think of them, but they think that those concerns are mostly unfortunate and undesirable. They maintain that people should just be themselves and not worry about what other people think. This group of people feels uncomfortable with the fact that they, themselves, sometimes manage their impressions because it makes them feel like a social chameleon, changing colors as they go from one situation to the next. They regard the whole idea of impression management as superficial and manipulative, almost seedy. I understand both of those perspectives, and I sometimes find myself caught between them. As someone who has explored the topic deeply, I'm absolutely convinced that self-presentation is not only natural and normal, but it's essential to our daily social lives. None of us could achieve our goals or even get along with each other if we didn't care about what other people thought of us. But when I take off my social psychologist's hat, the fact that self-presentation is so pervasive raises questions about who we really are, deep down, underneath the impressions and social images. If we can appear to be such different people in different situations, what does it say about who we are behind the masks we wear? And if we all wear different masks from time to time, does that mean that we're all inauthentic? Isn't there a fundamental conflict between managing our impressions and being authentic and honest? To fully understand self-presentation and its impact on our lives, we have to come to grips with what self-presentation tells us about who we are. So in this final lecture, we're going to dig into those questions. To begin, let me complicate things just a little by bringing up an aspect of impression management we haven't discussed yet. Most of the examples I've used throughout the course have involved people trying to convey some specific impression of themselves. We've talked about people wanting to appear attractive, or competent, or likable, or psychologically troubled, or bold, or whatever. But in most social interactions, people are concerned about managing more than just a single specific impression. They're not just concerned about being perceived as attractive, or competent, or likable, or bold. They're usually concerned with how they're seen over several characteristics at the same time. In a given situation, people might be more concerned about some impressions than they are with others, but they usually don't focus on only one impression and ignore everything else. Managing our impressions on many dimensions at the same time is a pretty complicated process. We don't have the ability to think consciously about all of the impressions we'd like to convey and then manage them one by one, at least not in a way that would allow us to still interact effectively with other people. So a great deal of impression management must be controlled automatically by processes going on in the brain of which we aren't aware. But how might this occur? Rather than...
Okay, so back to Robert Stoller. Most of our thoughts we're not even conscious of, and our mental life is frequently experienced in the form of fantasies. These fantasies often have scripts and stories. What we call thinking or experiencing or knowing is usually a tightly compacted but analyzable weave of fantasies. What we consciously think or feel is an algebraic summing up of many simultaneous fantasies. So these are the mental factors present in perversion and in sexual excitement in general. There's hostility, mystery, risk, illusion, revenge, reversal of trauma or frustration to triumph, safety, and dehumanization, fetishization. All of these are stitched together into a whole. The surge of sexual excitement is brought on by secrets. So when you tabulate the factors that produce sexual excitement, pure joy is usually at the bottom of the list. Only in rare persons can their love really contain sexual excitement. Rarely does their sexual excitement contain love. So in pretty much all relationships, hostility and secrecy play significant roles in producing excitement. The pervert cannot surrender to the experience. He retains a split-off, disassociated, manipulative ego control of the situation. This is both his achievement and his failure in intimacy. It is failure that supplies the compulsion to repeat the perversion process again and again. The nearest that the pervert can come to experiencing surrender is through visual, tactile, and sensory identification with the other object in the intimate situation in a state of surrender. Hence, though the pervert arranges and motivates the idealization of instinct, which the technique of intimacy aims to fulfill, he himself remains outside the experiential climax. So instead of instinctual gratification, the pervert remains a deprived person whose only satisfaction has been of pleasurable discharge.
Rather than managing each impression separately, people seem to coordinate a set of impressions together as a package so that multiple impressions can be carried out at the same time. So when moving between situations, roles, or target audiences, several self-presentations can change simultaneously as a set. Growing up, we gradually learn the largely unwritten rules and practices of social behavior so that eventually self-presentation becomes second nature, and we can execute sets of self-presentational behaviors without having to think much about it. So when you walk into a party, it's as if a switch is thrown that configures your self-presentations across several characteristics to fit the context of a party. And when you walk in to talk to your boss, a different set of impressions kicks in. And if you go for a religious service, a different configuration of self-presentations gets carried out. I call this set of impressions that a person tries to convey in a particular situation or to a particular target audience a self-presentational persona. A self-presentational persona is a particular set or profile of impressions that change together as we move from one social encounter to another.
And this is from Your Public Persona, Self-Presentation in Everyday Life by Duke University psychology professor Mark Leary, part of the Great Courses. So in his earliest relationship to his parents, most every child feels debased, humiliated, and frustrated. Now, in creating sexual excitement through his adult life, he reverses this process of debasement in fantasy so that the sexual objects are now in disguised or open form its victims. The exact details of the script underlying the excitement are meant to reproduce and repair the precise traumas and frustrations, the debasements of childhood that we can expect to find hidden in the script of the history of a person's psychic life. And there are two kinds of secrets related to erotic behavior. The first kind of secret is the information that we try to keep from others. But the second and most essential secret, close to the heart of erotic excitement, is the game in which we pretend to keep secrets from ourselves. So males' fear of women is generally kept a secret, but it's not wholly unconscious. The tough young man who beats up a homosexual is not without conscious knowledge of his fear that he's not masculine enough. The man who drinks for courage is aware that he feels himself to be weak. People who need pornography know they are perverse. They are quite conscious of their specific needs when they choose the pornography that excites them and disregard the rest. Process is secretive, not unconscious, though the roots of the excitement are unconscious. So excitement, sexual excitement, is a defense against anxiety. It is a transformation of anxiety into something more bearable, melodrama. So the ultimate danger that lies at the heart of sexual excitement is that one's existence, especially in the form of one's maleness or femaleness, is threatened, what Freud called castration anxiety. To dissolve that threat calls forth the mechanisms of hostility, such as dehumanizing others, and then decks the scripts out with mystery, illusion, safety. When mystery and risk diminish, boredom and indifference intervenes. The capacity of a particular piece of pornography to hold an audience's attention drops off precipitously with a second exposure. Peeping Toms, generally speaking, do not stare at their own wives. Square inch of thigh in a drawing room is vaster than an acre on the beach. Stage managers at strip joints read the sports page while the show unfolds. Most couples, heterosexual, homosexual, a fetishist, and his latest pantyhose, get bored. So all sexual excitement depends upon a scenario. Now, you may think you're beyond all this, that you're the complete package.
Tune our impressions. Although our automatic self-presentational persona gets us in the ballpark in terms of the impressions we want to make, we sometimes have to tweak particular impressions on the fly. We see that the issue isn't quite that simple. Most of us think of ourselves as a coherent, unified, integrated person. Yes, we have lots of parts and pieces, psychologically speaking. But most people have the idea that all of those parts and pieces should fit pretty well together and operate consistently and smoothly. So you have beliefs about all sorts of things, and you have a variety of attitudes and many facets to your personality. You also have values and many abilities and a lifetime of experiences that affect your reactions. Yet most people assume that all of these parts of you.
And my friend Half Galician makes great points in the chat. Is any of this falsifiable, or is it just stuff that sounds cool? So right now I'm just using abductive logic. I'm looking for the most simple, using Occam's razor to find the most simple explanation for the dynamics of sexual excitement. So I don't have the peer-reviewed studies. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I'm just saying that from my 10 years or so researching the pornography industry and from my own experience of sexual excitement and my own journey towards recovery from sex and love addiction, that it feels like there is some useful insights in here, at least some useful metaphors for reality. So sexual excitement depends upon a story. The person who's going to be aroused is the writer, the creator of the story. He's been at work on this story since childhood. You can also call it a love map. The story is an adventure in which the hero runs risks that must be escaped. Disguised as fiction, it is autobiography in which are hidden crucial intrapsychic conflicts, screen memories of actual events, and the resolution of all these elements into a happy ending best celebrated by orgasm. The characters are chosen because they resemble, though usually are not identical in appearance, with important people of childhood such as oneself, one's parents, one's siblings. Usually the writer becomes director, moving the action into the world of real people or objects. They are chosen because they are perceived by the writer-director as filling the criteria already written in the role. Prostitutes are available to those without better resources for casting. If the chosen characters pretty much fit the part, they work. They should, however, have just a touch of unpredictability in their behavior. That introduces the illusion of risk. If unvaryingly predictable, they are boring. On the other hand, if they do not stick close enough to their assigned role, too much anxiety results and they are traded in. So this is like with a genre film. So I don't think I've ever seen an underdog sports film that I have not loved. So you don't want a genre film to stick 100% to the genre script. You want a little bit of unpredictability, but too much unpredictability and the genre film does not really fulfill the needs of those who look to that genre. So each detail counts for increasing sexual excitement and avoiding danger and boredom. So for most people, sexual excitement is like threading a minefield. That hostility can be a central feature in a benign, inevitable part of the human experience. It's also illustrated in humor and in its physical gratification of laughter. As Freud observed, humor and hostility are closely linked. Take, for instance, slapstick, at which we all laugh, transform the same amusing act into a real event in the street, and one sees the hostility that must be there to generate the humor. Sadomasochism is a central feature of sexual excitement. The desire to hurt others in retaliation for having been hurt oneself is almost always essential for most people's sexual excitement all the time, but not for all people's excitement all the time. So during World War II, the Nazis devised a system for hiding messages, the microdot, a photograph the size of a printed period that reproduced with perfect clarity a standard-sized typewritten letter. Most human behavior, the functioning of the mind, works the same way. So in a process comparable to the miniaturization that allows stupendous amounts of information to be stored, arranged, rearranged, and transmitted within the brain, we in our minds use psychic mechanisms that work at high speed to compress great masses of data into amazingly small space in a purposeful, organized way. So the more meanings that we can cram into a small space, such as a word or an object. So I love black fishnet stockings. I love high heels. I love women who look haughty and are dressed for business success. The more impact, the more acute tension followed by acute release as the recipient, the reader, picks up on the meaning of these microdots, the meaning of these objects, picks up on them as instantaneously and subliminally as the sender creates the microdot, aware of its thickly packed meanings. That impact is not communicated if the message, the density of meanings, is beyond the capacity of the receiver to comprehend, such as if he's from a different culture. Sometimes the sender and the receiver are inside the same person, as in the eureka experience of discovery or an instantaneous dislike for another person. Every word in a sentence is a microdot. The excess meanings slop over so much, there's a miracle we even begin to understand each other. How differently will you understand the writing in this book from what I think I am saying? The problem is how to make my script, my words, my sentences overlap with yours enough so that we share, so that the communication we're sharing is worth the effort. What is the right word to be chosen at the right point? Why used here, not there? Why this context? Will you really understand me?
All these parts of you should operate together in an integrated and coherent fashion. People seem to believe this for a couple of reasons. One is that most people have the sense that they possess some true core self that is the essence of who they really are as a person. On top of that, most people think that they have some kind of a central mechanism in their brain that oversees and manages all the different parts of their psychological machinery to keep everything in line. And because they view themselves as an integrated, coherent being with a core true self and some central mechanism that manages everything, most people think that they should always be consistent and behave congruently with who they really are and what they're really like. If that's true, then conveying different impressions in different situations or to different people means one of two things. Either they're being dishonest or unethical when presenting themselves differently from how they actually are, or they lack the normal, consistent, authentic core self that well-adjusted people are supposed to have. And neither of those things seems good. But both of these conclusions are based on a couple of erroneous assumptions about human beings. First, people aren't actually that internally consistent and congruent on virtually every psychological dimension we can think of. Our abilities, our personality characteristics, our attitudes, our emotions, even our values. We each have a broad range of responses, all of which are us. Consider a characteristic such as conscientiousness, the degree to which you're responsible, dependable, and organized. On a 7-point scale, How would you rate yourself on conscientiousness? Really, pick a number from 1 to 7, where 1 is very low, 4 is moderate, and 7 is very high. How conscientious are you? Well, let's say you rated yourself 5 or 6 in conscientiousness, higher than average, but not compulsively dependable. Does that mean that in every situation, you show that particular level of conscientiousness, that your behavior is always a 5 or a 6 in conscientiousness? Of course not. Sometimes you're extremely conscientious, and your behavior would score a 7 on our scale. Now and then, you might not care at all how well you do something, or even whether it gets done. So you behave like you're a 1 or a 2. And lots of times, you're somewhere in between a 1 and a 7, but not necessarily a 5 or 6.
So there may not be any one essential self. Who we are depends on context and the situation and who we're interacting with. So according to Robert Stoller, perversion is the erotic form of hatred. It is a fantasy. It's usually acted out. Sometimes it's simply restricted to a daydream. The hostility in the perversion is a fantasy of revenge hidden in the actions that make up the perversion, serve to convert childhood trauma to adult triumph. So in the perverse act, the past is rubbed out, rubbed away. Trauma is turned into pleasure, into orgasm, into victory. John Money, the psychiatrist who came up with the idea of Lovemaps, describes it as the negative becomes positive, tragedy becomes triumph, aversion becomes addiction. So religion is a prime target for both John Money and Robert Stoller. So Robert Stoller describes perversion as sinful sexuality, the product of a Judeo-Christian heritage fortified in each different generation and location in the service of bigots. When one changes the beliefs of society, the sense of sin will dissipate. John Money opined, I've come to the conclusion that everything about pornography is so religious, moral, political, legislative, and judicial, and so epistemologically chaotic that it is beyond science. It's like trying to argue against the death sentence while the prisoner is already in the death chair. So to these psychiatrists, religious authority serves as an irrational, outmoded benchmark against which to assert the progressive, rational, modern neutrality of science. So John Money wanted to obliterate American religiosity. Robert Stoller would claim that the nuclear family produces perversion and that doing away with the nuclear family would decrease the frequency of the condition. Not knowing what will come if the family disappears, we cannot know how human sexuality will adapt. My guess is that if all goes well for our race, perversion will die down and variants increase. Perhaps someday perversion will not be necessary. So Professor John Money discounted the view that rape is about power, not sex. He said rape was a specific medical syndrome. He believes that 90% of rapists genuinely could not help themselves. And he used the term raptophilia. He says about rapists, they don't know why they do it. They hate themselves afterwards. You can't help these men till you give them a rest from their sexual drives. So John Money viewed rapists as boys whose healthy sexual rehearsal play between the ages of 5 and 8 had been punished, so they grew up believing that sexuality was bad. Rapists were never able to believe that sex could be had under normal, caring circumstances. It could only be had if it was wicked and naughty and never with a virgin. The woman had to be kicking, fighting, biting, screaming, and most importantly, terrified. And the New York Times wrote about John Money in 1990. The derailed sexuality of child molesters, exhibitionists, rapists, and deviant murderers, as well as others with peculiar erotic interests that are less repugnant, has its roots in early childhood when the first links between love and sex are forged. John Money has traced the development of sexual perversions in scores of people. He is the first to track their development from childhood origins to adult expression. He has coined the word love map to represent the brain traces that ultimately help determine what arouses people sexually and enables them to fall in love. Love map depicts an idealized lover, love scene, and program of erotic activities. So Dr. John Money concluded that love maps are formulated between ages 5 and 8. And the first indications of sexual perversions can be found in children as young as 5. Aberrant erotic development is fostered by traumatic family and social experiences, and then it becomes solidified in fantasies, dreams, and sometimes sexual acts during adolescence, when a flood tide of sexual feelings naturally emerge. The distortions that result, sexual perversions, now known medically as paraphilias, far more common among men than women. Paraphilias result when the natural link between romantic love and sexual lust is severed, blocked, or distorted. Majority of people with paraphilias have described a strict anti-sexual upbringing in which sex was either never mentioned or was actively repressed or defiled. So John Money predicts that repressive attitudes towards sex will breed an ever-widening epidemic of aberrant sexual behavior. Actions that can distort a child's love map include incest, physical abuse or neglect, emotional indifference, and seduction by a much older or younger person. Many, if not most people, emerge from such influences with their love maps relatively unwarped. Others are permanently traumatized. Some children have an inherent vulnerability to develop a vandalized love map. This might be determined by genetics, anatomy, hormones, brain development, or a combination. Due to messages received in childhood, some susceptible adolescents are unable to unite defiling lust with purifying love, and they instead develop a warped or distorted lust-love connection. The resulting sexual pathology represents an unconscious move to preserve lust by separating it from love, or to maintain the purity of love by repressing lust. That was my experience in my teens. There were the girls I wanted to bang and the girls I wanted to love. It wasn't until I was about 22 I was able to love the one that I banged. There's one 40-year-old man born with a thyroid deficiency. He was so overwhelmed as a boy by an alternately seductive and tempestuous mother, and who had great disdain for her acquiescent husband. The marriage ended in divorce during the boy's teens. The boy was further traumatized by his first sexual experience just before adolescence, masturbation episode with other boys and one young girl. When the girl was killed by a car a week later, the boy interpreted this tragedy as God's punishment for his sin. In his early 20s, he recognized his attraction to young girls. Even though he was able to perform sexually with a woman his own age, he had evolved a pedophilic love map that precluded his falling in love with anyone but early adolescents, like the girl who died. Even though the events that create love maps or a paraphilia are frequently terrifying and painful, they can ultimately emerge as a compelling source of pleasure through a twist in the brain that converts aversion to addiction.
You show a good deal of variability in conscientiousness. So, which one of those is the real you? For me, that question doesn't even make sense. They're all you. You may certainly tend toward one level more than another. Maybe you're more often like a 5 than like a 2 in conscientiousness, but still, they're all you. We could do this with almost any personal characteristic. But the point is that our behavior varies a lot, and people don't show the kind of consistency that many people assume is there.
Yeah, there may not be one true you.
Then, March 2011, it's a writing exercise for Terry Silverman's writing class. I wrote out what I find erotic. 3 main themes, and I read them to my therapist, and he said, that sounds like eroticized rage. So he said, that tends to come as a reaction to an over-controlling mother figure. That just smote me. As soon as I just heard those 2 words, eroticized rage, it just rang true. You know how you just hear something without understanding it, it just rings true? That's what it's like for me when I heard eroticized rage. So I went home and Googled the term, and I learned that eroticized rage is kind of the anger underlying sexual activity. And most of the times when I have sex, it's not because I want to communicate how much I love the person, but that's sometimes, but it's often out of an angry, vengeful place. Like, it seems like it evens the score. Like all the things that have happened to me, where life has done me bad, if I look at porn, it seems to even the score. If I have some like grudge sex, it seems to just like even the score and make me feel whole. I've had a reasonable sense of moral boundaries, so most of my expressions of this eroticized rage, I believe, being socially acceptable, but you don't have a real handle on this. This is the type of person who becomes a rapist or a molester, or there are lots of antisocial expressions of eroticized rage. I can feel them under the surface. And I researched it. So it's the anger underneath sexual behavior. And it said that even if you only express this in socially acceptable ways, it's a poison, and it's going to pollute the way you interact with people in daily life. And I have a real cruel sense of humor. I mean, I basically hate people, generally speaking, except for those who enjoy reading books. You know how you'll sometimes turn a corner and run into someone unexpectedly? Usually if it's a woman, they'll smile, because women get their sense of safety from connection. But when I run into people unexpectedly, that's not me. I kind of have a chip on my shoulder. I'm a preacher's kid. And when I start reading my stuff, people say, I get this image of, this angry child like shaking his fists and saying, you can't tell me what to do. So that's basically my psychological impulse. Yeah, my emotional maturity was about 4 years old. I was talking to the Robertson the other day, and she was kind of concerned about my adolescent behavior on Facebook. And because she was trying to set me up. And women would look at my Facebook, and they were appalled. And she said, I have teenagers, and so I said, well, emotionally, I'm not a teenager. I'm 4 years old.
Yeah, I weigh about 10, 12 pounds more here than I do now. I remember the Robertson told me, have you heard of privacy settings? And I responded, what's privacy? All right, let's say some prayers for Leponius Meridius Maximus. How do you think my interactions with Uncle Wally influenced my love map, Mr. Ford? Uncle Wally charted my love map, bro. It changed me forever. Thoughts and prayers. Well, I'm going to help you to understand how Uncle Wally punched a hole in your soul. So Dr. John Money grouped all these different perversions or paraphilias into 6 major categories or strategies, which he details in his 1986 book, Lovemaps. There's sacrifice and expiation. So this strategy allows for the expression of sinful lust on condition that the person atone for its irrevocable defilement of saintly love. So this may be some gay curious dudes who have gay sex and then beat the guy up afterwards. Say, it's not gay if you beat him up afterwards. Attempts at atonement may take the form of penance, say self-administered electric shock, or the form of the sacrifice of the partner through sadistic acts. Then there is lust murder, which may very well have happened in this case with Mr. Robert Aaron Long. May well be lust murder. Then there's the strategy of marauding and predation. Sinful lust is permitted into the love map on the condition that it be stolen, abducted, or imposed by force. Person with a predatory love map may be either predator or prey. So examples include rape and stealing to induce erotic arousal. A rape paraphilia demands that the victim be terrified and struggle against the rapist. A victim who does not resist may incite the rapist to deadly threats or violent assault to induce the resistance needed to maintain his sexual arousal. And there's mercantile and venal strategies. Here, lust is granted expression on the condition that it is traded, bartered, or purchased, not freely exchanged, by buying sex from a prostitute or exchanging play money with a spouse. And there's a category of fetishes and talismans. Lust is given expression through a token, a fetish, or a talisman that is a substitute for the lover, such as certain odors or tactile sensations, as in fetishes involving rubber, leather, fur, or silk fabrics or garments. And there are stigmata and eligibility strategies. Lust can be expressed without defiling the lover by having a partner who is not part of the person's social set and would evoke disapproval from the family. Or it may be a partner with missing limbs or of another race or religion. One-known example is Peter Pan, who, as the boy who never grew up, was the erotic self of his creator, Sir James Barrie, known to have intense attachments to sexually immature boys. And the final category for perversions is solicitation and allure. Exhibitionism, voyeurism, and dependence on pornography for sexual excitement. The best known examples of this strategy, which a kind of foreplay is substituted for the actual act of copulation. A flash's excitement depends on a reaction of fear, disgust, or surprise from the victim. If she shows indifference, this may prompt him to come closer or try harder to frighten her. The most effective deterrent might be a matter-of-fact comment that is sexually diffusing, such as, "Don't you know you should keep your pants zipped up in public?"
I've always been a sucker for self-help. It ain't worked. But I'm an enthusiast. I'll find something. Yes, this is the answer. Running marathons. That's the answer. Reading books. That's the answer. Fantasy. Imagining I'm a great person. Politics, redemption, Marxism, communism, ethical monotheism, Dennis Prager, Orthodox Judaism. These are the answer. So probably shouldn't trust anything I say.
You have 9 minutes left.
I was in therapy 2009. Beautiful therapist. I loved her. Oh, I loved her. I love going every week.
And I was talking about my enthusiasms at the time were Orthodox Judaism, which I still hold to, Alexander technique, now a teacher, still enthusiastic, and Kundalini yoga, which I'm no longer practicing. I practiced basically daily for 2 years. And she said to me, do you think these things, you're using them to ward off your underlying depression? Yeah. Yeah. I thought Orthodox Judaism could fix me. Most of the people I know, my understanding of their journey anyway, is that they thought becoming Orthodox would fix them. It didn't fix me. I thought yoga would fix me. I thought Alexander technique would fix me. I thought God, living in God, would fix me. I thought leading a righteous life would fix me. So now I've got this great one-man show about working the 12 steps for relief from modern sex addiction. So maybe I'm just using it to ward off my underlying depression. Sex and love addiction, 12-step programs, that's the answer, I'm transformed. But I would have told you all these other times. I was transformed by jogging 5 miles every day. I was transformed by listening to Dennis Prager. How many times have I been transformed? And my essential basic moral character and the way I treated people wasn't affected. So, I mean, who am I to tell you that I've been transformed by working the 12 steps? I mean, I'm deluded so much of the time. I think I've been transformed by working the 12 steps, but it's really not for me to say. Went into my first meeting in April of 2011, walked in the door, and the woman sitting across from me pretty obviously looks like a sex worker, a sex worker. Like you become a sex worker or you have a serious time with drugs or alcohol abuse, and it gets written on your face pretty quickly. I can pick it up. So I went into the room, and there were a lot of people who had been crushed by their addictions, slumped down. At this point, I've been porn-free for 6 months. So there'd been a lot of times in my life where I've gone years without looking at porn. So that's why I never thought I was a porn addict. And then there'd be times when I look at it 3 times a day. And I just love this product made by John Thompson. That's the name of the product. It's just a killer. It's this YouPorn. You can get anything you want on YouPorn.
Oh, wow. Disavow. So looking at John Money's book here on Lovemaps. So he says, Lovemaps. Each of us has one. Without it, there would be no falling in love, no mating, no breeding of the species. There is a sophisticated ribble about what a boyfriend and a Rorschach ink blot have in common. The answer is that you project an image of your own onto each. Many instances, a person does not fall in love with a partner per se, but with a partner as a Rorschach love blot. The person projects onto the partner an idealized and highly idiosyncratic image that diverges from the image of that partner as perceived by other people. Hence the popular idiom that love is blind. For a lover projects onto a partner or a love blot his unique love image as unique as his own face and fingerprint. Love map is not present at birth. Like a native language, it differentiates within a few years thereafter. It is a developmental representation or template in your mind. It is dependent on input through the senses. It depicts your idealized lover and what, as a pair, you do together in the idealized romantic, erotic, and sexualized relationship. Love map exists in mental imagery at first, then in dreams and fantasies, and may later be translated into action with a partner or partners. Under optimum conditions, a love map differentiates as heterosexual without complexities. Age-concordant, gender-different sexio-erotic rehearsal play in infancy and childhood is a prerequisite to healthy heterosexual love map formation. Deprivation and neglect of such play may induce pathology of love map formation, as also may prohibition, prevention, and abusive punishment and discipline. Conversely, exposure too abruptly to socially tabooed expressions of eroticism may traumatize love map formation. Love map pathology, whatever its genesis, manifests itself in full after puberty. The 3 categories of pathology are hypophilia, sexual dysfunction, hyperphilia, erotomania, and paraphilia, perversion. In all 3, there is a cleavage between love and lust in the design of the love map. In hypophilia, so sexual dysfunction, the cleavage is such that lust is dysfunctional and infrequently used, whereas love and love bonding are intact. In hyperphilia, lust displaces love and love bonding. The genitals function in the service of lust alone, typically with a plurality of partners and with compulsive frequency. In paraphilia, love and love bonding are compromised because the genitals function in the service of lust, but according to the specifications of a vandalized and redesigned love map, and also with compulsive frequency, the redesigned love map manifests itself in fantasy and the staging of that fantasy in actual performance. Paraphilia, a perversion, typically has a dual existence, one in fantasy and one as a fantasy carried out in practice. So a paraphilia or a perversion is a response to the neglect, suppression, or trauma of its formation. It's developed with distortions, with omissions, displacements, and inclusions that would otherwise have no place in it. A perversion, a paraphilia, permits sexual arousal, genital performance, and orgasm to take place, but only under the aegis of a particular fantasy or live performance of the special substitute imagery of that particular paraphilia. So a paraphilia, a perversion, is a strategy for turning tragedy into triumph. This strategy preserves sinful lust in the love map by disassociating it from saintly love.
I just love the John Thompson product. I just get like these feverish phases where I just have to get that relief. Then I get months without it, years without it. So here I am in a meeting, and the lead speaker talks about how he had these certain cyclical patterns in his relationships. 5 minutes. And I identify with that, because I've never had a relationship much longer than a year. I had half a dozen relationships that lasted about a year. And my therapist recommended a 12-step program that kind of looked at these things in the context of relationships. And after the main speaker, we all had 3 minutes to share. So I shared, I said, hey, I'm right on point, it's 12 years, and grew up a Seventh-day Adventist preacher's kid. And afterwards, this other guy came up, he was also a Seventh-day Adventist preacher's kid. And he was just like the coolest guy. He was just like a great guy. Just a great guy. Just like good looking, and just dynamic, and just really honest, no pretense. And this is a good guy. I go to meetings, meet people like this, and hang out with people like this. And so after the meeting, we're hanging out in the parking lot, meeting this great guy. The speaker is also a great guy. And they've read about me in the LA Weekly and other places. And so they were interested in my story, I was interested in theirs. I confess, yeah, I'm a junkie for self-help. And try this and this and this and this and this. I'll try anything. And the speaker says, well, 12 steps isn't self-help. It's about transcending the tyranny of the self through service. So I liked some of the people at the meeting. I liked the meeting. I started going back. By about the 3rd meeting, I could feel a definite sobering effect of having gone to a meeting. Because when I then stepped out into life, I wasn't quite as predatory. Like normally, the fact of when I walk through life, I'm just looking around at who I want to fuck, and imagining how I want to fuck her. That's kind of how I go through life. Like, there's the small percentage of women that I want to fuck, and there's everyone else. And everyone else is pretty much invisible to me unless they read books. And I noticed that as I came out of meetings, for hours, I wasn't having these predatory thoughts.